What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bring guys another fantasy football video. And this one will be going over every single matchup ahead of week 6 and sort of going over which players I think should be in your fantasy football lineups and which guy players should be on your benches. It's been a really exciting first 5 weeks. We're coming into week 6, and at this point, you sort of probably know where your team's at. And obviously, it's getting to sort of that crunch time. Maybe you're 1-4, 2-3. You know you got to get a win this week, or maybe you're 4-1, 5-0, and you're really trying to lock in on that bye and get yourself into a good spot come the playoff time. So, really important to make sure we get our lineup set the right way. Thursday Night Football was kind of a bit of a dud. It wasn't super exciting, but at least Kelsey had a good game. Saw good defensive performances at least. So at least the main fantasy relevant players were okay. I played the Chiefs defense since Kelsey in one league, so that went pretty well. So hopefully Thursday Night Football went well for you, and then hopefully we can make sure we get your lineup set as possible come Sunday. So love doing these videos. It's really fun for me to sort of go game by game, sort of go over what I'm expecting to happen. And it really helps me set my lineups, and hopefully I can help you guys set yours as well. So as always, if you guys have any specific start sit questions, I'm happy to help. So just let me know in the comments. I'll let you know what I would do in your situation. Make sure you let me know what the format is, whether or not it's PPR, half PPR. Really helps me give you guys the best advice possible. So yeah, with that, let's just get into the first game here. So the first game here is going to be the Ravens at the Titans. This game is actually being held in London, so do make note of that. That's another 9:30 a.m. Eastern time kickoff. So if you guys are on the Pacific Coast, make sure that you do set your lineups before Saturday night. Make sure that you guys aren't going to be surprised by any potential last minute inactives. Make sure that you're either going to wake up in time before those games, or make sure that you've got everything as set as possible. So in this game for the Ravens, Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, they're going to be must starts. I know Lamar had a down week last week, but he actually performed really well. The Ravens led the NFL with 7 drops last week. Mark Andrews had 3 of them. Despite that, Andrews had 10 targets last week. You got to keep starting him. Zay Flowers had 11 targets last week. He continues to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense, and it's a really good matchup against the Titans. So I do think you can use him as a wide receiver 3. Outside of that, Derrick Henry, I think he's a running back 2 in this one. The Ravens defense is pretty good. It's not something that I'm super excited about, and I do think the Ravens probably end up winning this game. So there's the concern that Derrick Henry sort of gets game scripted out, but he'll get enough volume. You got to probably play him if you have him. DeAndre Hopkins, he's a wide receiver 3 option for me. It's a decent matchup against the Ravens secondary. He performed really well last week, and I do think he probably ends up being like a fringe top 30 wide receiver the rest of the season. I think you can use him as a wide receiver 3 this week. Outside of that, for the Titans, I think Tajay Spears can be used as like a low-end flex play or like a desperation running back 2, especially in PPR formats. He continues to see the field quite a bit. He's played 50% or more snaps in 4 or 5 games so far this season. He looks pretty good when he gets the ball as well too. So I think he's got definitely needs to be on rosters in case of an injury to Derrick Henry, and then you can obviously play him in like a desperate scenario if you need him. Outside of that, I would probably bench all of the Ravens running backs this week. If you do need to play one, I would prefer Justice Hill just because he's more utilized in the passing game. We saw him get the touchdown last week, so I don't think there's any true goal line back in this offense. I think they'll just play whichever one happens to be on the field. But in pass catching situations, it's going to be Justice Hill, so I'd play him if I had to play one of them. Next up, we've got the Panthers at the Dolphins. This one's pretty easy. For the Dolphins, you're going to start everybody. You're playing Tua, Tyreek, Waddle, and Mostert. They all need to be in your lineups. The question mark here for the Dolphins is whether or not Jeff Wilson ends up active. If he plays coming off of IR, I just don't really think I want to play any of these Dolphins running backs outside of Mostert. Probably ends up being like a 50, 25, 25 timeshare between the 3, with Mostert getting the obvious lead and doesn't give me a lot of confidence. But if Jeff Wilson ends up inactive, I do think you could play Salvon Ahmed as a decent running back 2 play. As like a desperation running back 2, not somebody that you need to get in your lineups, but there's a good shot here that the Dolphins get up a lot at halftime, and they obviously want to preserve Raheem Mostert, so you could see a lot of Salvon Ahmed in the second half. However, if, like I said earlier, if both Wilson and Ahmed are active, I'm probably just going to bench both of them. For the Panthers, if Miles Sanders play, he did pop up on the injury report with a shoulder injury, so note that is a new injury from him, from his groin injury he's been dealing with earlier. If Miles Sanders plays, I probably want to bench both Panther running backs. Miles Sanders just hasn't looked like himself the last several weeks. He hasn't really been good either this season. That's sort of been a miss on my part coming into the offseason, and it's just not something that I'm super excited about. If he does sit, though, I do think you could play Chuba as like a low-end running back too. Chuba's looked better than Miles Sanders so far this season, and if he's going to get the lion's share of the backfield touches, he could be certainly used as a backfield option here for you guys in fantasy. Outside of that, for the Panthers, Adam Thielen, I think he probably needs to be in lineups. He continues to perform at a really high level. The garbage time just keeps flowing for this Panthers, who are just a really bad team. They find themselves down multiple scores pretty much every single week. And although that's not good if you're a Panther fan, it is good if you're an Adam Thielen fantasy manager. So you're probably playing him. DJ Chark and Jonathan Mingo, they're probably low-end flex options. You could play them. Obviously, they both had decent performances last week just because of how much garbage time they got. There will be a lot of garbage time in this game as well, so you could certainly play them, but you're just hoping for like a fourth quarter spike in production for them after they really get off to a slow start. And then I would bench every single tight end in this game. Next, we've got the Saints at the Texans. For the Saints, Alvin Kamara is going to be a must start. The volume has been great for him. They're utilizing him as a pass catcher quite a bit, and the Texans are certainly a team that you can beat on the ground as well. Outside of that, for the Saints, Chris Olave is still a high-end wide receiver too for me. I know that he's been relatively disappointing the last 2 weeks, but better days are coming, I promise. Derek Carr is going to heal up. That shoulder should be better. It should be honestly close to 100% this week, according to all like the fantasy football doctors that I see, the sports physicians on Twitter that I follow. So it sounds like he'll be back to near 100% at this point, and the Texans defense is not something that really scares me. Chris Olave is too good of a player. You got to play him for sure. Michael Thomas is going to be a low-end wide receiver 3 for me, and then Rashid Shaheed, like a desperation flex play, a guy that you're just hoping catches a long touchdown, but I'd probably prefer to bench. Keep an eye on Kendre Miller for the New Orleans Saints. He looked really good last week. He caught a few passes. I think one was like a 34-yard reception. He looks like a really capable player, and I do think he probably ends up being the back that you want to own in this backfield outside of Alvin Kamara. Don't start him in this one, but he's a guy that I'd keep an eye on, see if he continues to be involved. Outside of that, for the Texans, CJ Stroud, he's going to be a decent streaming option. This Saints defense is legit. It's something that I'm certainly concerned about, but it is at home for the Texans. Stroud has looked really good so far this season, averaging just under 300 passing yards per game. So you could certainly play CJ Stroud if you want to. Damian Pierce is a low end running back too. You're pretty much praying that he scores a touchdown. He's going to see around 20 touches in this game. It should be a pretty close game as well, so I don't think he'll get game scripted out of this one. But the Saints defense, like I said earlier, it's a legitimate defense. Damian Pierce has not been efficient in the season, so you're probably going to see about 20 carries for 60 to 70 rushing yards, maybe 2 or 3 catches in there, and ends up being a pretty mediocre fantasy day unless he falls in the end zone. Other than that, Nico Collins, he's a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Tank Dell and Robert Woods got banged up last week. They both are sort of questionable this week, so that's sort of up in the air, but there's a really good shot here that Nico Collins ends up seeing a huge target share in this one. He's probably got to be in your lineup. And then Dalton Schultz to be a decent streaming option if both Dell and Robert Woods miss this game, just because he'd be so necessary for the offense. Other than that, Nathaniel Dell or Tank Dell would be like a low-end wide receiver 3 for me if he plays. I'd prefer to sit him even if he's active, and honestly, he's probably going to be inactive. He's in concussion protocol. We haven't really seen a player suit up the week after getting concussion yet, so I wouldn't expect Tank Dell to play in this one anyway. Next, we've got the Commanders at the Falcons. This one's pretty easy for the Falcons. Brian Robinson, or for the Commanders, you'll understand the confusion. We got Brian and Bijan Robinson in this game. For the Commanders, Brian Robinson, he's a low-end running back too. The Falcons won't blow out the Commanders the same way that the Bears did this last week, so I wouldn't expect Brian Robinson to get game scripted out the way he was last week. The fact of the matter is, though, the Falcons are still an elite defense against running backs. They give up the least fantasy points to opposing running backs in the entire NFL. That's just because of how few plays the opposing team gets to run, because of how much the Falcons run the ball, on top of the fact that this Falcons run defense is actually legitimate. So I would prefer to probably look elsewhere for Brian Robinson, but he's better than a lot of the guys I've talked about earlier, like Chuba, Salvon Ahmed, Kendre Miller. So if you're looking at those tiers of guys, you could definitely play Brian Robinson. He'll probably see 15 to 20 touches in this game. Just won't be super efficient. You're hoping he scores. For the Commanders, outside of that, Terry McLaurin, he's a wide receiver 3 for me. This Falcons defense doesn't scare me too much, but I do think you could see a lot of AJ Terrell and Terry McLaurin. That would be a little bit concerning. John Dotson and Curtis Samuel are both low-end flex plays. I'd prefer to sit them both, and I would lean Curtis Samuel over Dotson if I had to make that choice. Logan Thomas, he's a nice streaming option. He's been really good at the tight end position for the Commanders, and honestly, he just looks good. He's looks healthy, and he's a guy that I'd be comfortable playing as a streamer this week. Antonio Gibson, he'd be a desperation flex play for me in PPR formats. Don't want to play him if I don't have to, but if you're in a real desperate spot, I suppose you could use him and hope he catches 4 or 5 passes. For the Falcons, Bijan Robinson, he's a must start. You got to play him every single week. He's going to be a top 5 running back by the end of the season. Drake London, he's a low-end wide receiver 3. You're hoping for either a big play or a score. Johnny Smith is banged up for the Falcons. I do think he'll probably end up playing in this one, but if he sits, then I feel really confident in actually starting Kyle Pitts. Otherwise, I think Pitts and Johnny Smith are both just like low-end tight end ones, guys that I don't want to play, but you can if you need to. And then outside of that, for the Falcons, Tyler Algier, he's a touchdown-dependent flex play or low-end running back 2 or 3. You're probably going to see 10 to 15 touches for him. You're hoping he falls in the end zone. He hasn't done that since week 1, so I wouldn't be super confident in him doing that. This Commanders defense can be beaten on the ground. Other than that, I didn't list that here, but either the quarterbacks, Desmond Ridder or Sam Howell, I'd prefer to bench them both. Sam Howell would obviously be my preference if I had to pick one of them. He's looked decent enough. The passing volume's been there for him, and he's got good pass catchers, so you could stream Howell, but I'd probably prefer to sit both of them if I can. Next, we've got the Colts at the Jaguars. For the Colts, Gardner Minshew, he's a low-end streaming option for me. I do think he's looked relatively competent, and this Jaguars defense doesn't scare me, so you could use Minshew if you need to, and especially in 2 quarterback leagues, Minshew should certainly be picked up and actually played potentially in this matchup. Outside of that, Jonathan Taylor and Moss are both like low-tier running back 2s. They're probably each going to see 10 to 15 touches. It's probably the last week that I feel like you could start Moss, and I do think I would still lean Jonathan Taylor over Zach Moss just because of that upside, but it's sort of tough to get a read on that situation. I think they're both just like low-end running back 2 options, and I would understand that when you're playing them, you just got to be ready for a potential dud or a potential boom game. There's a really wide range of outcomes for those guys. For the pass catchers for Indianapolis, Michael Pittman, he's a wide receiver too. He's going to see about a 30% target share with Gardner Minshew. That's really great. You'll probably see 9 to 10 targets, and definitely in PPR formats, you want to get him in there. Josh Downs, he's seen like 28% of the targets with Gardner Minshew. That's a really great flex option in PPR. That probably ends up being 8 or 9 targets for him, and that's really solid, especially in PPR formats. For the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence is the low-end quarterback 1 for me. Travis Etienne would be the low-end running back 1. He's looked really great so far this season. It's another miss on my part. I really wasn't all that high on Travis Etienne coming into the season, but he's been super efficient. He's had several long touchdowns, and Tank Bigsby has not been nearly as involved as I thought he might be. So keep playing Travis Etienne. He's a rock solid start. Calvin Ridley, he's a must start. He probably blows up this week. We saw him perform really well against the Colts in week 1. The Colts have been absolutely carved up by opposing wide receiver 1s all season. You've got to get Ridley in your starting lineup at all costs. Christian Kirk, he's a wide receiver 2 for me. He continues to play really well for the Jaguars after posting that 0 in week 1. He's just a really good player. You probably got to get him in your lineup, especially in PPR formats. Evan Ingram should also be in your lineups. He's just another really talented player. The tight end position is really brutal, so you got to keep playing Evan Ingram. And then Zay Jones, he'd be like a low-end flex option if he's active. You're using him by the goal line a ton. He's got 2 touchdowns on the season already, and he just looks really good so far. If he's healthy, I'd probably play him as like a low-end flex option, but you certainly don't have to. Next, we've got the Seahawks at the Bengals. For the Seahawks, Ken Walker, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett are all going to be in your lineups. Geno Smith's going to be like a low-end streaming option. This game could turn into a shootout, although I wouldn't necessarily bank on that. But if it does, Geno could certainly pay off as a quality streamer. JSN would be a desperation flex play. You're sort of hoping that he gets more involved in this offense after the bye. It's certainly possible, but it's not something that I would bet on. I'd probably prefer to bench JSN. I'd also bench Zach Charbonnet and Noah Fant. I know Noah Fant's been really involved lately, but hasn't been really much of a volume play. He's just been super efficient on his targets. And then Zach Charbonnet, I do want to keep an eye on him, see what his involvement looks like after this bye. We could see this backfield shift more towards like a 50-50 split. And if that happens, Charbonnet would definitely be someone that we want to keep an eye on going forward. For the Bengals, Joe Burrow, he should probably be started. He's looked a lot better last week. I know it was against the Cardinals, but just watching him play, he looked a lot more mobile. He looked healthier. He had a couple plays where he really did avoid a sack and got outside the pocket. And it wasn't something he was able to do for the first 3 weeks of the season. So a little bit more excited about Joe Burrow going forward. Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon are both going to be in your starting lineups for sure. The Seahawks run defense has been much better this season, but you're still going to play Mixon. He's getting a ton of volume. He looks decent, and they're utilizing him as a pass catcher a bit too. So you've got to play Mixon. T. Higgins, he's probably in your starting lineup if he plays. I know that the history with T. Higgins is he can certainly be an active player when he's questionable and then go out there and play 1 snap and give you a 0. And you do have to understand that is an option. So if you're a heavy favorite in your matchup, maybe play it safe, go with someone else. And if you're loaded as well, you don't need to play T. Higgins. It's certainly not something that I'm excited about doing, but the upside's there. The Seahawks give up 39 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. T. Higgins is a really good player with what should be a really good offense. So if he's healthy, I'd probably prefer to play him. But obviously, depends on what your league, like what your roster looks like. If you've got better options or safer options, or if you have an easy matchup, maybe you had a really quality Thursday night go your way. Maybe you play it safe and don't put T. Higgins out there. If T. Higgins does sit, I think Tyler Boyd would be an okay flex, especially in PPR formats. He had 8 targets last week. He's involved in the offense. You'll probably get like 6 for 40, 6 for 50. Hoping he scores, but he probably won't. You're probably just going to take those like some 8 to 12 PPR fantasy points and call it a win if you want to as your like low end flex play for Boyd. Next, we got the Vikings, the Bears, and what could be a super exciting game. You're definitely going to start everyone. This just should be a super high scoring game. Kirk Cousins and Justin Fields both need to be in your lineups. Both these defenses are atrocious. It should be a really fun game to watch. Alexander Mattison, he's going to be a solid running back too for us. The Bears are not a really good defense at all. They give up 31st least fantasy points, or the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs in fantasy football right now. They are also really good matchups for opposing wide receivers and tight ends. So Jordan Addison and Hawkinson are basically going to be must starts for you guys. KJ Osborne as well. He's a quality flex option. I'm probably looking to use him as like a wide receiver 3. For the Bears, DJ Moore, he probably needs to be in your lineups. He's been a stud so far. I know I said sell high on him 2 weeks ago, and then he went out and put up 53 fantasy points or whatever it was on Thursday night. So that was a bit of a miss, but I still think you could potentially be looking to sell high on DJ Moore, but that's not the point of this video. That being said, DJ Moore is definitely in your starting lineups. Cole Kmet, he can be started as well. I think he's a really talented player, and this Bears offense looks a lot better than I thought it would. And on top of that, this Vikings defense is awful. So you can play Cole Kmet as like a low-end tight end 1. For the running backs, that's the real question for the Bears right now. Roschon Johnson would be a low-end running back 2 if he's active. We know he's in concussion protocol from last Thursday night. So if he clears, I think you can use him as a low-end running back 2, and that would make Deonta Foreman a non-startable asset for me. If Roschon Johnson misses the game, though, Deonta Foreman probably becomes a low-end running back 2. He's going to see all the volume against the mediocre to bad Vikings defense. So you could play Deonta Foreman if you wanted to. Next, we've got what should be a really defensive game here. Certainly less exciting from a fantasy standpoint than than the Vikings-Bears game. We got the 49ers at the Browns. Christian McCaffrey for the 49ers, he's a must start every single week. Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk are probably like wide receiver 2/3s. If you've been starting them, you're probably going to continue doing so. George Kittle, he's probably going to be in your lineups as well. I wouldn't expect a big game out of him. I know he had the 3 touchdowns last week, but he probably comes back down to earth in this one. I'd prefer to sit both quarterbacks in this game. Brock Purdy, I know he looked great, but the 49ers passed the ball on 42% of their plays. This is going to be a run first team and a defense first game. They're not going to put up many points, and I don't want to play Purdy against a really good Cleveland Browns defense. The Browns are going to be without Deshaun Watson. They'll likely be starting PJ Walker in this one, so you're obviously not going to start him. That makes Amari Cooper like a low-end wide receiver 3. I'd expect him to see 7 to 8 targets, probably end up with 4 to 5 catches and 50 yards. So certainly not something that I'm excited about, but you can play Cooper. It's just I would prefer to look elsewhere. And I'd definitely sit every other Cleveland Brown. Elijah Moore is not someone that I'm confident in with a backup quarterback. Jerome Ford's on the injury report with a knee injury. Just a banged up, mediocre running back against a really good defense. It's not something that I'm excited about. And then David Njoku, I have no confidence in either. But hats off to David Njoku. He posted a picture of his facial burns today. Just really badass that he was able to play through that. He really did just burn his face off, and really impressive that he was able to play a game of football. So hats off to him. I hope he heals quickly, and hopefully things makes a full recovery there. Next, we got the Patriots at the Raiders. This one is pretty easy, honestly. Ramondre is like a low-end running back too. It's not something that I'm super excited about, but the Raiders do give up the most receiving yards to opposing running backs. Hopefully the Patriots take advantage of that and throw the ball to Ramondre a little bit more than they have been. I traded for Ramondre Stevenson in one of my higher buy-in leagues this last week, so I do have some belief that Ramondre Stevenson's going to bounce back and be better down the stretch, but he probably ends up being like a low-end running back too this week, and then you're hoping he sees better usage, and then you can start trusting him more. But I think you can play him, but obviously if you have better options, I'm okay with you looking elsewhere just based off of how bad he's been. You could also play Hunter Henry as a tight end streaming option, but I'm not super excited about it. He's been really bad since those first 2 weeks, and it's just not something that I'm super excited about. But this Raiders defense is one they could exploit. For the Raiders, it's going to be really easy every single week. You're going to start Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams, and Jacoby Myers, and you're going to sit everyone else. There's nobody else that's involved in this offense, and it's just not worth looking for value outside of that. And outside of that, you're going to bench every single or both quarterbacks in this game. You're going to bench every pass catcher outside of Hunter Henry for the New England Patriots. None of the receivers are separating themselves. None of them look good enough to really be trustworthy assets. And this offense for New England just looks brutal. So I don't want to trust anybody there really. So yeah, it's pretty simple for this game. You're looking at Adams, Jacobs, and Myers, and you're probably looking at Ramondre and then maybe Hunter Henry. Next, we got the Lions at the Buccaneers. For the Lions, David Montgomery and Amon-Ra are going to be must starts. Montgomery continues to see 20+ touches a week, and Amon-Ra is just a must start every single week with how electric he is out of the slot. Sam Laporta, he needs to be in lineups if he's active. He did pop up in the injury report and missed Thursday's practice with a calf injury. That's new, so we need to keep an eye on that. I'm recording this a video Thursday night at like 9 p.m. Pacific time. So just keep an eye on that. If he happens to be inactive, then we obviously have to look elsewhere. But I do think he'll probably play, but it's just a little bit concerning when you see a player pop up in the injury report later on in the week. So keep an eye on that. Outside of that, for the Lions, I'd bench Jared Goff, Jameson Williams, and Josh Reynolds. Jared Goff's just much better at home. The Buccaneers have looked decent on defense so far, and I just prefer to bench Goff in this matchup. Jameson Williams, I want to see be more involved. And then again, this Buccaneers defense is good enough that I'm not excited about playing Josh Reynolds in it. Rashad White for the Buccaneers, he's a low-end running back 2 for me. He's probably going to need to catch a lot of passes to pay off, so I prefer him in PPR formats for sure. The Lions' run defense is really good, but Rashad White continues to see a really meaningful workhorse role in this Buccaneers offense. As long as he's got that role, you can comfortably start him, but it's definitely going to be a lower output day. I wouldn't expect a ceiling performance for him. Mike Evans, he should be started if he plays. He still has not practiced yet this week with the hamstring injury. We do want to keep monitoring that. It's certainly concerning that after their bye, he's unable to return to practice. But if Mike Evans can play in this one, you definitely got to play him. He's been elite so far, and this Lions pass defense is one that you can certainly exploit. Chris Godwin, with or without Mike Evans, is going to be a solid wide receiver 2 option. He'll probably see 10 targets in this game. Like I said, the Lions pass defense is not something that I'm scared of. So you can play Chris Godwin. Then I would bench every single other Buccaneer. Baker Mayfield's not one that I trust. The other pass catchers in Tampa, nobody really stands out. You could potentially look at Cade Otton if Mike Evans being out, just because then maybe you see an increased target share for the tight end there. But it's not something that I'm excited about. I prefer to bench those guys. Next, we've got a divisional matchup between the Cardinals and the Rams. For the Cardinals, it's pretty easy. Marquise Brown is like a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Dan Mercado, one of the most popular waiver wire ads this week, is a desperation running back 2 or flex play, mainly in PPR formats. I do expect Keontae Ingram to get a lot of the carries. He is technically listed at the top of their depth chart, but Dan Mercado is going to be the pass-catching back for this offense. He's the guy that I prefer to play out of the 2, and I think he's got 10 PPR fantasy points potentially up his sleeve. You're hoping that they get down early and then you get a couple of dink and dunk passes to him. But I will note the Cardinals really haven't thrown the ball to the running backs a whole lot this season, so I don't know how valuable that role is going to be. So it's not something that I'm excited about. I would prefer to look elsewhere, but obviously if you picked up DeMarcado, you probably need him, so you're probably going to play him. Zach Ertz, you can stream him. He's been receiving a ton of volume. This Rams defense has not been great against tight ends so far, so you can certainly play Zach Ertz. Matthew Stafford, he's a great streaming option this week. If you've got a quarterback on bye, or even if you don't, I would certainly look at Matthew Stafford. He could certainly be an elite option for you and someone that I do think is going to have a really great week against the Cardinals defense. Kyren Williams, again, playing a really bad Cardinals defense. You can play him. He's probably like a low end running back one this week. Cooper Kupp, he's a wide receiver one, if not the wide receiver one this week. And Puka Nacua, he's a wide receiver two, someone that you definitely should be starting. Tyler Higbee, he'd be a desperation tight end streamer, although not one that I'm excited about. Passing volume seems to go down for him quite a bit with Cooper Kupp in the lineup. And then Tutu Atwell, he'd be a low end flex option. We saw the Rams trade Van Jefferson this week, so Atwell is firmly entrenched as a wide receiver three. He played a lot of the snaps. This Rams offense runs three wide receiver sets all the time. Pretty much every single play, you've got those three wide receivers, Higbee and Kyren Williams in the field. So Atwell will be on the field. He's a decent player. You could certainly play him as like a low end flex option if you need to, but it's not the one that I'm excited about. Next, we've got the Eagles, the Jets. For the Eagles, it's pretty simple. Every single week, you're going to play Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, DeAndre Swift, and Dallas Goedert pretty much every single week. I know that all of them are not necessarily locks to be high performers every single week. There will be down weeks for each of the pass catchers. It's really hard for all three of those pass catchers to perform at a high level every single week. So there's going to be a down week in there for at least one of those five guys every single week, but you're going to play all of them. They're too good. They've been too good for fantasy for the last couple of years and this year. You got to keep playing them. You got to just trust them and understand that there will be some down weeks, but the upside's there for all of them. You're going to start all of them every single week. Breece Hall, he's a low end running back two in this matchup. He's looked really good the last 2 weeks, and he looked obviously really good against the Broncos. But we do need to remember it's the Denver Broncos. Their defense has been atrocious so far this season, especially against running backs. And the Eagles are one of the better run defenses in the NFL. So it's not something that I'm super excited about for Breece. Garrett Wilson, he's a wide receiver three option. Obviously, the passing volume is just not there for this Jets offense, but Garrett Wilson's too talented to completely knock off. So you can play Garrett Wilson, but it's not something that I'm super excited about. And then I'd bench everyone else in this game. Next, we got the Sunday night football game between the Giants and the Bills. Saquon, if he's active, should be in your lineups. The Bills' run defense has not been fantastic so far this season. They obviously just got carved up by Travis Etienne in London last week. Saquon's too good of a player. He's going to mean too much to this offense. If he's active, you have to play him regardless of whether or not you're worried about potential injury limitations. Matt Breida would be like a desperation running back too if you needed to in Saquon's absence. I do think Saquon's going to play on Sunday, so I just bank on Saquon being there. But if we don't get any sort of confirmation, do understand that you're sort of risking it because it is the Sunday night game. You do have limited options in terms of who you can pivot to if he ends up being like a late day scratch. Darren Waller for the Giants, he's probably going to be in lineups as well, but I don't love it. He's dealing with an injury of his own. Daniel Jones is likely going to be a game time decision. He's dealing with a neck injury from last week. Could be Tyrod Taylor in this one. If that's the case, I'm not excited by any means about any of the pass catchers. I would definitely bench all other Giants, including Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, whatever pass catchers you want in this offense. It's not something that I'm excited about. So Saquon and Waller are the only really Giants that you can even consider playing. I'd probably prefer just to play Saquon, but if you have Waller, you probably just have to play him. For the Bills, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and James Cook just need to be in your lineups. Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs have been electric so far this season. James Cook, I know it was a down week for him last week, but the Giants' run defense is certainly one you can exploit. James Cook has looked really good so far this season. I know last week was a bit of a dub, but you got to play him. And then Gabe Davis, he scored a touchdown in 4 straight weeks. I think he's a really solid wide receiver 3 option. I'm probably just going to ride the hot hand with him, and I'd prefer to get him in my lineups if I have him. As always with Gabe Davis, if you're in a matchup that you're super excited or you really think you have wrapped up, you don't want to take any risks, then obviously you could pivot towards a safer asset. We do know that Gabe Davis obviously has a lot of variance in terms of what to expect from his fantasy output. So if you're in a game that you fully expect to win pretty handily, then maybe you play a safer asset than Gabe Davis and just accept like 10 PPR points instead of the 0 to 20 that Gabe Davis is going to give you. But I'm excited with that Gabe Davis so far. I've got him in a lot of leagues. I think you could certainly do worse than him, and I'd probably be looking to get him in the lineup, which should be a blessed matchup against the Giants. And then last, we've got the Monday night matchup between the Cowboys and the Chargers. For the Chargers, it's pretty easy. Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Keenan Allen, they all need to be in your lineups. Joshua Palmer, he's a decent wide receiver 3 option. He did lead the team in targets 2 weeks ago before their bye. Gerald Everett, he can be streamed. This Cowboys defense doesn't really scare me all that much, and this should be a high-scoring game, so you could play Gerald Everett if you want to. Quentin Johnson, I think he should be on benches for you guys, but I am curious to see how his utilization changes for this team after the bye. We always know that with rookies especially, their utilization can change quite a bit after a bye week. So just keep an eye on Quentin Johnson. It's possible that maybe he takes over that wide receiver 2 role, although I haven't really seen enough out of him on the field to think that's possible. I think that Joshua Palmer is pretty locked in as that wide receiver 2 in this offense. For the Cowboys, Tony Pollard and CeeDee Lamb, they're must starts. You've got to get them into your lineup. And then Dak's going to be like an okay streaming option. Like I said, I do expect this game to be a really high scoring game. Dak's probably going to have one of his better games so far this season, so you could certainly play him as a streaming option if you want to. Jake Ferguson should probably be in lineups. He's super involved for this team. We all know how bad and how much of a struggle it is to play a quality tight end in fantasy. So Jake Ferguson's been involved. I'm probably looking to start him. And then Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks are both low-end flex options. I would prefer to play Michael Gallup than Brandon Cooks, but this is a high-scoring game. It should be at least. So if you need to, you could pivot towards one of those two as a deeper league flex option, but I'd certainly prefer to keep them on my bench if I can. So that'll do it for the start sit video this week. I've gone over every single matchup and gone over which players I think you guys should be starting, sort of what my expectations are for the game. So if there's anything I missed, feel free to let me know. If you got any players that I, for whatever reason, didn't touch on, let me know in the comments. If you have any specific start sit questions, I'm happy to help you out. Certainly just ask me a question in the comments. I'll make sure I get back to you there. If you have any last minute start sit questions, feel free to tune in Sunday morning, 1 hour before the 10 a.m. Pacific time games kick off. So 9 p.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be doing my Sunday morning live stream. I'll go over last minute injury updates and sort of take any of your last second start sit questions. So should be a lot of fun. If you want to make sure you don't miss that, just subscribe to the channel. You'll get a notification when I go live. So please do help subscribe to the channel. I really want to hit that goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season. We're at like 880 something. So we had a nice spike so far the last few days. It's been really cool to see this community grow, and I really do appreciate all the support. So yeah. As always, if you guys like the video as well, please do just give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm, helps me know that I'm doing a good job, and helps me know that you guys want to keep seeing more content like this. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching the video. I wish you guys luck tomorrow night or tomorrow during the day. Hopefully you guys can get some fantasy football wins, and then I'll catch you guys in the live stream if you guys want to swing by for that. So thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you next time.